first of all, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. My name is Jane Debevoise. Most of you know. This is Asia Art Archive in America. We have Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong. That's our mothership. That's where most of our resources are. That's where most of our people are. We are globally a library and archive, primarily a digital archive of material focusing on what we call recent art from Asia, contemporary art from Asia. We're not completely comprehensive. We're basically driven much by projects, strategic initiatives that we think are important. We can go into that some other time, but we don't have time at the moment. What I'd really like to do is to introduce Ziying Duan, who is the Robert H. N. Hou Foundation grantee, which is administered by Asia Art Archive. Robert H. N. Hou is a nonprofit. It's a foundation, a family foundation in Hong Kong, and they have been partners of Asia Art Archive. We've been very honored to have them as partners of Asia Art Archive for a long period of time, and they have been instrumental in developing these research grants, curatorial research grants as well as scholarly research grants that we propose every year. And I'm saying this in detail because we would love all of you and your friends, if you have friends who would be eligible, to apply for them. For more information about it, please look at our website, which is aaa.org.hk. Duan Ziying is going to be speaking about her research, her year-long research that she has done under this grant. This grant was focused, for her purposes, on experimental art activities in Guangdong, China, primarily from the 1990s to the 2000s. And she takes as a point of departure, and I'm going to be very interested to hear how you do that, is looking at issues around identity, regional identity, curatorial strategies through the lens of Hou Hanru, curator of Chinese art, but curator of more than that, but Hou Hanru's Canton Express exhibition, which took place at the Venice Biennale in 2003. We will have what we normally do is divide our presentation or our events into two parts. One, we have presentation, and then actually in this case we're going to have a respondent or a conversationalist in Shutan who is or was a member of the Big Tail Elephant. Does Big Tail Elephant group still exist?
Because two of our
members have passed away already.
So I think it should be finished because the last time we have a show together should be in the 2003 or 5.
Okay. But Shutan was a member of this wonderful group, which was based in Guangzhou, starting in the early 1990s and continuing through the 2000s. Sadly, two of the four participants have passed away: Chen Xiaosheng and Liang Juhui. So we're thrilled to have you here as well to talk about your experiences in Guangzhou, but there'll be a conversation, I guess, between the two of you. And then we're going to open it up to questions. And if I might change my decision. If you don't ask questions, I will call on you. Okay? So get out your pen and pencil and start taking notes, because I definitely will do that. That is why the front is always empty here, as if I can't see you back there. Anyway, I'm going to just give a little background on Duan Ziying right now. She is from China, Hubei or Hunan? Hunan. But is currently based in San Francisco. She got her BA at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in art history?
Yeah.
Wow, that is great. I'm an historian, there are not many left. It's like dinosaurs. And her MA degree in curatorial practice at the California College of the Arts. She has been an assistant curator at the Chinese Cultural Foundation in San Francisco and at the Cadiz Foundation and in San Francisco as well. And she's done many other things, and I want to ask you about your present projects, but I don't have time, and we're not going to focus on that right now.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
we can talk about that later. But anyway, again, I wanted to thank the Robert H.N. Hou Foundation for their unbelievable support, and we really couldn't do this event or do these grants and meet so many great aspiring scholars and curators without them. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight, and of course thank you Dan, Hillary, and Cici from the Asian Art Archive in America for their help for coordinating this event. And I want to send my great gratitude to Anthony Yang, who's not here today. He's a researcher at the Asian Art Archive in Hong Kong, who actually facilitated my whole research process and support me actually. And of course, I feel extremely grateful for the Robert H.N. Hou Family Foundation for this opportunity, because I think this program is almost the one and only program that supports research on the subject about the Greater China area from a modern or contemporary perspective. So the subject that I finalized for my research is Canton Express, a section under Zoom of Urgency, curated by Hou Hanru in the 15th Venice Biennale in 2003, which includes artists from Guangdong or actually living and working in Guangdong at that time. However, in my presentation title, you can see there's a parenthesis and there's a word mix inside, because actually Canton Express is a precursor of Canton Express, because a similar group of artists participated in the Guangzhou Biennale in 2002. And so I would say the idea of Canton Express even came way earlier than that, when Hou Hanru came up with this idea. So I feel Canton Express can be seen as a concept that's been measured in different situations, in different kind of curatorial project or artist project, rather than merely one title of one show. And this is photo that I took outside of the M+ Museum in Hong Kong in 2017, where they were restaging this iconic historical exhibition, Canton Express. At the same time, the West Kowloon district was under construction. I choose this because I feel like this image vividly depicts how we project our imagination of the past on the backdrop of reality. So before I get into my presentation, I'd like to explain a little bit about why I choose this topic. So in fact, in 2015, I got to know that Asian Art Archive in Hong Kong started to archive cities on the move, an itinerary exhibition project curated by Hou Hanru and Hans-Ulrich Obrist from 1997 to 1999 in Europe, US, and Asia. And that exhibition is well known for propelling new integration of Asian contemporary art and its tendency to apply urban theories, context, and the method of self-organizing in exhibition design or exhibition model. And the exhibition design of this exhibition actually was reinvented for each venue in collaboration with different architects. So when you look back at what they did, it looks like different versions of fictitious and synthetic Asian cities. Every time they redid the scenery or the backdrop or the installation structure of the show, it kind of revisits the question of whether or how to represent the region by the way of imitating it. So as a result, the debate around this exhibition is centered on the, whether it can serve as a curatorial model that challenges the existing norms at a time, as this project is almost the only institution practice that takes a multidisciplinary approach to contextualize contemporary Asian art and history. So Cities on the Move became my thesis project in 2015, and I finished it in 2016. And my primary focus on this project is on exhibition model and exhibition design. And in 2016, when I was conceiving my proposal to Robert H.N. Hou Family Foundation China Research Grant, I thought it could be an opportunity for me to look into the other smaller scale exhibitions, to continue to think of this question about how we can tackle the relation between a region and its representation. And this question actually has arisen in the contemporary art curating in 1990s when we entered the global era. I would say since then the presentation of the otherness based on a geographic concept has become very prevalent. So that is to say, I started my interest in Asia as a concept in curating, and then I narrowed it down to Pearl River Delta or South China, or just Guangdong province actually. Of course, there are many other factors behind my proposal, especially in the past few years. You can see some exhibitions were held to discuss the development of contemporary art in Guangdong or in Pearl River Delta or in Guangdong province, including the Big Tail Elephant show in Times Museum and OCT Institute, and of course M+ restaging of Canton Express. Or even I would mention like the establishment of Wuxing Association of Guangzhou non-profit art initiative also plays this kind of role in integrating the Cantonese art scene. So there seems to be an art scene in Guangdong, and oftentimes Canton Express is referred as a successful, or at least the first model of representing a local identity and in the global context. But in fact, the academic or the public attention on the region Pearl River Delta emerged in the mid-1990s, which can be shown on these publications around that time, but their focus are on the phenomenal economic development of this region, especially its impact on world trade and investment. And people use this as their guide to start doing business in this newly integrated region. But the cultural presentation of Pearl River Delta actually can be traced back to Dutch architect Van Koolhaas, who did his research project on this region since 1995 or 4, I would say. And he showed his research on Pearl River Delta at Documenta 10. And this is an installation shot of his small show. In fact, in 1995, Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Hou Hanru both flew to Hong Kong to have a meeting with Van Koolhaas. And Obrist later recalled that that meeting with Van Koolhaas was really the key moment when CDs on the Move was born. And they even quoted a term by Koolhaas in the CDs on the Move's catalog and pointed out that the term is an inspiration of the visual imagination of their own project. So the term is called CD of Exacerbated Difference. And it kind of means that urbanization in southern China is not the methodical creation of the idea, but opportunistic exploitation of flux, accidents, and imperfections. And the actual planning of the later on the show CD on the Move are full of accident and imperfections. And the differences among different Asian artists actually are enhanced by the density of the show. So I might hazard a guess that Van Koolhaas' diagnosis of Pearl River Delta or southern China, especially the term city of exaggerated difference, also might influence other exhibitions, including Canton Express in the early 2000s. And the urban reality of Pearl River Delta might exemplify the new transforming urban conditions emerging in many other Asian cities around that time. So from mid-1990s, when Pearl River Delta came into the worldview, to this collective presentation of Cantonese artists in Venice Biennale in 2003, within these 6 years, some artists from Guangdong province, they had successfully made their debut in the museums and biennials in Europe and the US. And you can look at the timeline here, and we can identify some artist group and artist spaces in Guangdong. For example, Big Tail Elephant Group, they had their first institution show here in Switzerland, and a year before they were in a group show called Another Landmark Space, which is a very important exhibition focused on Chinese art at that time. For the people who actually do not know much about Big Tail Elephant Group, I would say they're an artist group active in Guangzhou in 1990s, and their team member includes Chen Shaoxiong, Liang Juhui, Lin Yiling, and Xu Tan. We might say that they're the second artist collective emerging in Guangdong after the Southern Artist Salon, Nanfang Yishu Salon, dismissed in 1980s. So Big Tail Elephant is known for self-organizing show and art happenings in unconventional spaces. Even though they are an artist group, their activities cannot get away from the concept of space, because the gathering of the artists and their activities actually synchronize the forming of the alternative space in Guangdong. That's why even today people like to anchor the topic about group power and alternative space in the discussion of Cantonese art. And here you can see there's a group of exhibition that was held in a space called Liberia Borders Bookstore. Yeah, and it was another space where the artists hang out, Cantonese artists hang out and met curator and foreign guests at a time. And it functioned like a salon space for small shows and events, besides being a bookstore or a publisher. And in 1999, they hosted a series of exhibitions by artists in Guangdong, and many of them they participate Canton Express, both in Guangzhou and Venice. From this timeline, you can also find some early exchanges between Cantonese artists and the institution in Hong Kong after its handover to China, which I found quite interesting is here. This is a solo show by Big Tail Elephant in Hong Kong Polytechnic University in Hong Kong. And this is another exhibition participated by Big Tail Elephant Group artist Liang Juhui, even though I had a very hard time finding the information about it. But I think it can be seen as the first exhibition that used River Delta or this greater Delta region as a concept in curating, earlier than the later exhibition, City Slum, the first annual contemporary art from Zhujiang Delta. Yeah. So also from this timeline, you can find some other clues that I want to point out, which is the connection between the art scene in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou, and Guangdong, of course. For example, China Art Archives and Warehouse is an organization funded by Hans van Dijk in collaboration with IOA in 1993, and they organized some experimental solo shows for Cantonese artists in Beijing. I mean, actually, they're probably their first solo show in Beijing. And the establishment of the later gallery, Vitamin Creative Space, is actually also related to that space, because the co-founder of Vitamin Creative Space, Zhang Wei, was kind of poached from China Art Archives and Warehouse by the artist Zheng Guohu from Yangjiang, when Zhang Wei was the assistant of Hans van Dijk. So I think if I had another opportunity to do this research, I will try to like delve into the intercourses in between specific cities like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and Beijing or Hangzhou. If we say Guangzhou, the upper slides, the images, if we say Guangzhou is the epicenter of our art activities in Guangdong because of Big Tail Elephant and Liberia Borders, then I would say Yangjiang is another place for more idiosyncratic activities. For example, artist Zheng Guohu funded a design and architectural company called Yimei or Young Men. They play multiple roles in Cantonese art scene, including designing the exhibition Canton Express, and also they even sponsored Big Tail Elephant Group's exhibition No Room in 1994. So I think the uniqueness of Yangjiang is that they actually have their own focused art group where they actually funded their own like magazine publications and forum. And I will just give you an example. So it's a magazine called Zifang, which I translated to region, not location or site. And from the cover design of their first issue, you can recognize that they identify themselves as a region or local component opposed to the central government in Beijing. Actually, in 1990s, I would say some Chinese architects like Wu Liangyong, they came up with idea called New Regionalism, which is in favor of region-based urbanization, not city-based urban planning. That's also one of the reasons why I use region in my presentation title, not locality or site or place. And another discovery that I had in my research is an art group called Friends United, and funded by artists Jiang Zhi and Wawa Renlan in Shenzhen. They're funded after the youth the film group funded by Owning and Cao Fei at the time, after they moved into Guangzhou. So Jiang Zhi found that it's necessary to fund another artist group to continue the conversation about video art and media art. And I think they could be actually a case study for us to look into the correspondence between artists in Shenzhen and Hangzhou, particularly in the media art or video art scene. So even though in the late 90s and early 2000s, a museum like Guangdong Art Museum and Hexiangning Art Museum, they were funded in Guangdong and started presenting contemporary art. I think this smaller artist group actually are the real catalyst of the original conversations among artists and curators. And talking about alternative art spaces, now we're getting to Guangzhou Biennale in 2002. With the booming of alternative art spaces, Hou Hanru and the other two curators, they were co-curating a project called Pose for this biennial. So they invited alternative art groups and independent organizations to hold the work to reflect a sense of community and the new logic of artistic organizing. Hou Hanru, of course, invited Cantonese art space like Library of Burgers Bookstore, because they are the earliest space that plays an invisible role in the development of Cantonese art. And Yonghe Chang, or Chang Yonghou, who designed the Cities on the Move in the Vienna session, he did the overall space design for Hou Hanru's project in Guangzhou. When Chen Tong, the founder of Liberal Brokers Bookstore, took over this project to kind of curate his own presentation of Cantonese artists, he decided to take an action of devolution, which is to give away the authority and let artists themselves to drop off the artwork freely. So even though the artist group never worked in a collaborative way to realize a united project, they need everyone's consent in terms of how they want to realize the visual presentation of their own region or their own work. And the first proposal sent to the biennial committee from Liberal Brokers Bookstore is to encourage artists to drop off their works freely in the space, and the documentation of the process should be part of the show. And among the other adopted design sketches, there's actually another installation proposal eventually used for the later Canton Express in Venice Biennale. That's why I say the idea of Canton Express actually, and also many other components of Canton Express came earlier than that. After several rounds of negotiating and discussions, this Cantonese artists, they reached to a consensus that the best way to present Cantonese art is to reject And it's an idea proposed by the artist Zheng Guogu, who founded the Yimei or Yangmen Architecture and Design Studio. They thought the rejection is the best way to interpret the bookstore as well as the Southern China. But it's not an attitude to resist the biennial, they say. It's not an attitude to resist the curatorship. It's just a resistance to themselves. And the final proposal submitted to the biennial committee is titled Individual Absence, Collective March or Strike. And they propose to seal off the empty containers that the biennial prepared for them without putting in any artworks, but only to show posters informing that this is a strike. And also they propose to present 1,000 copies of the catalog, which document the whole process, called Book of Changes. And there's some very interesting quotes on the catalog pages that I added for this slide. And after the long bargain with the curator from the Guangzhou Biennial, well, they didn't really just drop down like all the stuff that they proposed at the same time. Actually, they end up with keeping the unfinished artworks in the exhibition space. And however, they did paste the poster that I just showed you before on the containers as if it's a protest or a sign of post that makes the construction or the installation incomplete or simply cut off, like a strike scene. Also, for some financial reasons, the installation of Canton Express reverted to a simpler exhibition design designed by architect Hou Hanru, which includes 3 intermodal shipping containers extruding from the outdoor space to the inside of the biennial building. I think the whole process is quite revealing in terms of how they try to dissolve their relationship with the locality and the so-called blue power of Cantonese artists. It shows that at that time they have already been aware of the controversy of the individual independence and also the collectivism or the collective proposition. A year later, in the following Venice Biennale, artist Zheng Guogu was assigned as the coordinator and the designer for the representation of Canton Express, and the word mix is deleted from Canton Express. And he adopted the design he proposed for Guangzhou Biennial and divided up into 2 parts, including the skeleton and also a bridge, I'll say. But these patterns are both taken from the infrastructure patterns that began to become commonplace in Guangdong or southern China in 1990s. And you can see some actual installation shots of Canton Express here, which divided into 2 parts. And this slide shows a photo of temporary houses, the image on the top, jamming in a side of a street in Yangjiang, and this is what actually Zheng Guogu's design passage refers to. And in my interview with Zheng Guogu, he told me that this is a street where the laid-off workers set stands and sold small commodities there, and his activities. And outside of Zheng Guogu's shelter-like design for artists from Guangdong, Yong Hechang designed a tilting floor here structure from the rest of immigrant Asian artists or other artists from the other regions. So I think the transformation of Canton Express can be seen as a change of gestures for the Cantonese artists, from repudiation to acquiescence of locality. And since then, the discussion about experimental art activities in Guangdong attempt to define Cantonese art or Cantonese contemporary art as a concept tied to its locality, a region that witnesses the frontier of Chinese economic reform, urbanization, and globalization. And it is just a question for me, like whether this kind of uniqueness of locality actually exists, and whether the social conditions really facilitate emergence of this group of artists. Here I want to quote Chen Tong, the founder of Liberal Brokers Bookstore, comment on Hou Hanru's curating. And you can take a look. So what is questionable for Chen Tong is this kind of implication of social deterministic theory into the...
So
Yeah.
that fast.
Yeah. Okay. So for Chen Tong, he thinks it's very problematic to apply this social determinist theory into the interpretation of contemporary art in Guangdong, especially because the political and economic policies of developing PRD, Pure River Delta, enforces a conclusion that art is reflecting its cultural atmosphere determined by the formal conditions. In this way, it will be hard to get away from the proposition called economic base determines the superstructure, a modified Marxism applied as a political ideology by the Communist Party in China. And fundamentally, art can be sensed to a barometer of state planning and policies. So Chen Tong's resistance to this kind of economic determinism direct him to question the profundity of Canton Express. And Canton Express at Venice for him is kind of like a symbolized substantive space encapsulating a community in the shared region. Therefore, he kind of proposed another idea to dismiss the concept space in favor of the concept time by appraising the term autonomous zone that Hou Hanru came up with in his exhibition, 自治区 Autonomous Regions, 10 years after Canton Express was exhibiting in Venice. After reading this passage, you might ask, does the concept of space still matter? What does space mean in our contemporary practices? Well, especially for artists from Guangdong, who was contextualized in that kind of discourses. So right now, I want to outline Hou Hanru's critical and curatorial past, started from 1990s, and to argue about how Canton Express in general refers to a dialectic spatial concept when the notions of nations, region, city, and place are replaced one after another around the turn of the new millennium, and why space is still a crucial concept for us to reflect that history. And this is a quote from Hou Hanru, which he emphasized that space is a key aesthetic of the 1990s. So both of the installation strategies that used in Guangzhou, Biennial, and Venice can be recognized from many other exhibitions curated by Hou Hanru, which are to internalize these urban experiences in the isolated art institution structure. Besides the move, we can see an earlier curatorial example that they did for Johannesburg Biennial in 1997, and the other one is street theater, the solo exhibition of Atelier 非常建筑, co-curated actually with Evelyn Duano, and the other example is the exhibition at Tokyo Opera City Art Gallery called My Home is Yours, Your Home is Mine. And I think they're all more or less taking city or its infrastructure component as the prototypes in their spatial configuration. For example, if we look at street theater, it's a solo show by Atelier 非常建筑 funded by the architect Yong He-chang. And they are the China's first private architecture practice studio. And in the exhibition at Apex Gallery, actually in New York, back to 1999, he put up a street stage inside of the Apex Gallery and ramps it up to the screen on the top, as if it's a rising extension of the church street outside. And a similar exhibition design is used in the entrance of Zoom of Urgency, which reaches the ground levels in the middle of the space over there and followed up by the bridge of Canton Express. So the application of urban infrastructure in exhibition design, no matter in the forms of street, bridge, model room in Canton Express, and street theater, they are all like spatial forms that particular but also generic sites in urban areas. When Hou Hanru suggests the approach of transforming exhibition space into urban construction site in the 1990s, I would say it resonates to an aesthetic that showed up in 1920s in order to call for an innovation and activation of museum space. Some of you might recognize this. When architect and artist L. Lissiski worked on the exhibition Abstract, Cabinet, Press, and Film and Photo Show as their exhibition designers. And 40 years later, this tendency of integrating research in art with three-dimensional environment came back around 1960s. We can say the She Cathedral as an example at the modern Mosette in Stockholm, and also the proposal of a hypothetical project called Fun Palace by Cedric Price. And again, 40 years later, in the 1990s, when Cities on the Move was curated, I think we should look at what's happening around that time as well. So, of course, Nicolas Bourriard proposed the idea of relational aesthetic, which again takes its horizon to the realm of human interactions and its social context in curating. And there's a point that I want to draw you guys' attention is that there's actually a linkage in between the urban context that's being discussed at that time and his proposal of relational aesthetic. He claims that art shouldn't belong to the well-defined private space or a dedicated venue like theater or cinema, which solely presents one genre of art. And the idea of art as a relational space stems from the urban cultural and city model after the growth, especially after the growth of towns and metropolitan cities at the end of World War II. With this kind of collapse of aristocratic conception of the arrangement of artwork within like galleries and private houses, this rising democracy to acquire territory for its citizens, art making becomes practical in urban sphere with greater individual mobility, and inversely the experiences of daily life in the cities like street scene and live scene are brought back into museums. So that's what's happening in the art world in general for a callback of architectural intervention or an urban perspective in curating in 1990s. While in the context of curating art of otherness like immigrants, artists, or artists outside of Europe and America, there's a linkage also in between the urban space and the concept of third space emerging in 1990s. And that leads to a path of curating regionality and also the curating of the otherness or the the artists from the marginalized areas. And we might look at Chinese artists who migrated to Europe or America since late 1980s, and it kind of complicates people's imagination of artists from the other nations. Hou Hanru has pointed out that the problem of nation-state appropriated by both artists and the Westerners, and he proposed a strategy called beyond and in-between space, or the third base, a concept contributed by Homi Baba, which he funded in the artwork of diasporic Chinese artists in the 1990s, for example, especially Huang Yongping, as the most obvious example. And the third space, it becomes an ambivalent site that blurs existing boundaries, questioning the existing categorizations of cultural identity through hybridity, and eluding the oppositional positioning of East and West, nationality and individuality, and self and other. And also it can attribute to the internationally cultural exchange or internationalism at that time, such as in the real immigrant culture in the West, both in Europe and America. Therefore, expanding this cultural identity by exploring the in-betweenness becomes a theme in the art practices, and the concept of third space is seen as a cultural strategy to counter the nation identity for those non-Western artists living in the West. In the context of Hou Hanru's practices, the artwork by immigrant artists actually engender a negotiable space of cultural identity. And if we look into some early examples, like landscape in the potential ruins and the meeting in the corridor in the early 1990s, or a later exhibition called Provisions in 1997 in London, they all kind of deliver a message that immigrant artists, they are also Parisians or international citizens. And it's very similar to the idea called Chinese are international, and later on that he argued about in many other articles and the curatorial projects. In Hou Hanru's argument of diasporic artist space particularly can refer to a representational space or lived space spoken by theories like Henry Liverford, particularly the state of exile and the unhomely sense caused by relocation of home. On the other hand, it kind of refers to the local context that diasporic artists live in and reshape in return. So identity becomes a multi-dimensional third space, as it only exists when there is an active connection in between the individual and the environment. And physically, it is manifest in the surroundings and especially non-private sphere. If we run back over the circumstances between Canton Express, where Canton Express were developed in Hou Hanru's curatorial practices and critical writings, it is almost a turn of his focus on the refusal of application of national state or the resistance to an united cultural positioning to a landing on the site, which are consistently allowing pluralities. And from the Guangdong Biennale and the 50th Venice Biennale, this exhibition both challenged the way how biennial are constructed as a state game by replacing the national divisions with some other approaches to measure spaces like regional curatorial practices. And actually, Canton Express is not even the only exhibition that used a regional lens for their curatorial project. For example, you can see this one, Fourth Lines, Contemporary Art, African Art and Shifting Landscape, is solely focused on the contemporary African art and African diaspora at that time. And so these small exhibitions becomes like exhibitions of exhibitions, and you can imagine Canton Express in Zoom of Urgency becomes exhibition of exhibitions, or region of regions of regions. So it kind of facilitates what the curator of the Venice Biennale, Bonami, wants, which is to map out like different areas with its own identity and independence. Therefore, this kind of notions from nation to region favors a more or less democratic approach for curating. And even though it's almost impossible to really actualize the so-called third space that Hou Hanru and many artists captured in their practices, this kind of theoretical approach contributes to the transition of region to of a nation to region in the curatorial or artist practices in general in 1990s. And yeah, that's it. The Cantonese art in the slides, such as I quoted Chen Tong in this presentation, and he has almost like a very cynical comment on Canton Express. So I really want to ask Xu Tan also, who participated Guangzhou Biennial and Venice Biennial in the Cantonese art presentation. So my question is, do you think the condition of urbanization or the urban development is a necessary factor to interpret Cantonese art or artists in Guangdong province?
So actually, I have to say my English is very poor, very poor. So maybe something I cannot understand the English, and maybe I cannot express my idea. Okay. So actually, I agree with Hou Hanru. So because I want to say in that time in the 50s, in 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, the Chinese contemporary art, or that time we say modern art or avant-garde art, I think there are two main ways to make this art. One way is, so you know, like the Huang Yongping, like the Cai Guoqiang, or so artists want to show the how to say, the traditional Eastern tradition as the identity, to show this to the Western world. That's a very important method to that time. And then another way is the artists want to show, criticize the political ideology, the problem after Cultural Revolution. So this is two ways. You can say also the Guggenheim show. You can also say this is mainstream. But Hou Hanru, this new idea that brought a new path for Chinese art. So many people began to notice the changing of the city, or of course opening and the economical development. And so how important this changing our life? Yeah, I think this is very important. This kind of the topic, but I think that's important. And why it happened in Canton? you know Canton. So the first time I came to Canton was in 1979. The first feeling of mine about Canton, I think that's not the Chinese city, because people there, they never notice something happened to the north. They don't care about it. People don't listen the radio of the central radio station. But I came from Wuhan. That time, every day you have to listen the central government's voice every day. And then the television came. Every day they want to see the Hong Kong television. And in 1979, everybody, many friends told me, many people want to escape to swim to Hong Kong, that time. So people just facing the South and Southeast Asia or American, they never care about the North. So I think that's kind of the culture and the living style is 在很边缘。
marginalized.
Yeah, 所以它政治
It's
上
always at the edge.
Yeah.
At the edge.
Yeah, both in the traditional identity is very weak, and also political, the feeling is also very weak. So this is a very good place. That time in 90s we say post-modernism. So that time we just feel or enjoy the new time. So Hou Hanru can, how to say, we can have very good 对接 yeah.
So I observed in my research that actually there was some very active connections in between the Hong Kong institutions, especially the universities, and the Big Tail Elephant Group and some other Guangzhou-based artist group. Can you explain a little bit about how did that happen?
So when the how to say in the early 90s, Big Tail Elephant began to work. So some Hong Kong institute and the Hong Kong artists or curated, they began to take care, notice us. So very special thing is how to say sociology, 社会学 department of the Poly University.
Polytech University.
Just these days you can see it every day with with fire or something. That they came to make a special project for research project for big-tailed elephant. So we stay together for several years. So and then Ziying showed the photo. We have an exhibition at the
Polytech University.
at the campus, just the
In the campus.
open air, just the place. So this day why I saw the photo, I feel 有很熟悉啊。
Very familiar.
Yeah, I saw
Outdoor.
yeah, 20 years ago. Not 20 years. Yeah, in 96 or 95, we have a group show there. So and also many students came from the Hong Kong some university. They study art to come to do the exchanging how to say with us. Since and till the 1997 something is changed. So because the sociology that how to say the leader, the chief, they retired. They said they don't want to move. They don't want to stay in Hong Kong anymore. So something just stopped there. And his assistants is still a very good friend of us. Yeah. So when Liang Juhui passed away, the funeral ceremony, they came. That's in 2006. I mean, very good friendship. Yeah.
Yeah, because I found it very ironic that after handover of Hong Kong to China, this kind of activities actually stopped because the retirement of this professor. And but I think it's a very interesting point to continue for the researchers to look into, especially right before the handover, like 1997, 1996, 1994, and around that time. Because, for example, there's some other exhibition that I didn't mention on the slide is that like there's a show called Outside of the White Box, including some artists like Song Dong and Ling Ling, and they were held in Hong Kong. And this is an exhibition that really draw like the discussions in between Guangdong and Hong Kong. Yeah. There's also another saying about Canton Express that Canton Express is more like a way or alternative way for artistic organizing and working rather than a show or curatorial model. Because especially for the Guangzhou Biennale, you can see Chen Hong strategies to give away the authority of the curatorship and let people just do whatever they want, but it kind of violates the in structure of a biennial and the initial thought of the chef curator of the biennial. So I want to ask Xu Han, where this kind of democratic form or organizing come from? Like,
I think it should be the time. Yeah, I say that's post-modernism time. So people with a lot of the new idea from outside, people like to be more equal. That's different from the 80s. 80s in Guangzhou, there are a group called 叫南方艺术家沙龙啊，沙龙咱们说英， yeah. So that's different structure. We have the group with a leader and all the people working for him. So then after June 4 event, the leader moved to French, Wang Du. Yeah. So the big tail elephant, three of the four members beside me. So they are also the member of the 南方艺术家沙龙. Yeah. So they say in the future we don't need a leader, we need an equal. So we have some like law. We have to in any time we have to everybody just in many exhibitions we have no curator. We just for everything for exhibitions, space or exhibition work or something, just how to say negotiate. Yeah. And so this is the reason the Hong Kong sociology, they give a name, ologists give a name 叫说大尾象是一个公民社会. This is coming from Harvard.
So they say the big tail elephant group is a civic society.
Yeah, because the sociologist was studying the German. He's a student of the Harvard. So he gives.
And he's from Hong Kong.
Yeah, Poly University. Yeah, Poly.
So he's the head department.
So
the head of the department of the
so maybe this is why you say the democratic idea, just in this kind of mode or environment, yeah.
And another topic that I want to rise up here is the funding of alternative space in Guangdong. Because, like for a commercial gallery like Vitamin Creative Space, which you might know, is actually an idea proposed by artist Zheng Bogu, who designed the Canton Express in Venice. And he found Zhang Wei, who works for Hensman Deck in Beijing, and kind of pointed her to be the director of this new gallery to replace Liberal Workers Bookstore, because Chen Hong is getting very busy and there's no space for artists and curators to meet and have this kind of formal exchanges. So I want to ask, is it possible to say that the earlier like experimental exhibitions that Big Tail Elephant did, like no room or possibility in this kind of unconventional public spaces, kind of proposed an idea of how alternative art space should be formed, and it's also its own ideology related to that.
I think for us, in the early 90s, we have no way to find any space where they can accept us, except that they don't. In 1992, we contacted the Guangdong Academy of Art, the Institute of Art. They have a museum. We asked them, could we use your space to show our annual show? At first they said yes, but then several months later they said no. So this is why because we have a special guy, Liang Juhui. He's very strong. he was very strong to find. He has very strong social relation to find the basement of the 电视大学，听说。
Television. Adult university.
Just on the basement. So and it's really difficult. I think sometimes we found some private building like the no space. The show was in there. There are a very long history about the house. How can we use that? And then in 2005, where we felt so difficult. We finally we went to a temple, Taoism temple. We were 4 guys. We 4 people just bicycle to the Taoism temple. We went into the temple. Oh, Lao Tzu and Tao, just sit there. We think, how can we make contemporary the sense there? So we said, no, we cannot show. So then we just find another basement to show the possibility in 1996. So I mean, that time so difficult. Maybe Chen Tong he want to involve, but for him it's also very difficult. He was drove out from the university, the Academy of Arts. He moved almost every year here, just some time, and then say you should go. You have to go. You cannot stay here. So I think.
Why? Sorry, but why was it? Because his art was too radical, or what?
Yeah, because he at the first several years, the bookstore was in the school inside the campus. So inside campus, so there are a lot of the people from many different places to come. Someone from the American, so the leadership of the school is nervous about this. So some security, national security people came to. So one day the vice president of the school came to school to the bookstore. You have to go, immediately. so that. Then move out. The situation is a little bit stable, but it's really bad for him in the economical condition. So this is the reason he cannot make a space for he organized some small show at the bookstore like Jiang Zi solo show, Cao Fei solo show in the later 90s there, but he was failed several times to make a new alternative. He did, but he failed.
Shall we open to the public?
Sure.
Anyone has
But we have very well done. 8:18. 12 minutes. And do we have any questions from the public? And all I'm saying, oh yes, we do. Excuse me, sir.
When did vitamins start?
2000, just the Venice Biennale, the same year, I think. The same year.
2002,
2003,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And who funded the beginning? Who funded that space?
Just Zheng Guogu, Zhang Wei, and Hu Fang, 3 people. Yeah, 3 people. Yeah. 2002.
Maybe the
Yeah,
idea was
yeah,
formed
yeah.
earlier than that, but the office, because they made there is a show actually in Vitamin creative space in 2003 to respond to Canton Express, and so at that time the space is already established. So I would say maybe the idea was even before that.
Actually, at the beginning of the vitamin space founded, we regarded it as an alternative space.
Yeah.
Because that time everybody know in China we have no foundation, you have no money, you have to do business and using the money to your space. So that time many people think so. Many people can understand why you want to do business. So and also they support a lot of the young local artists. Yeah. Then the situation changed when they went to the world. Something has changed. Yeah. Before was.
I'm very interested in this idea of the regions, and I understand your description of why the idea of the region was important, because in the West, in the Venice Biennales, in those big shows, the Chinese artists that showed Chinese things and the Chinese artists that showed political things, that's what the West liked. And so they kept doing it. To kind of have this regional thing, and this is what you described, I thought that was a very clear description. But I'm also thinking, because I know a little bit of the art world now in Guangzhou and the art world in Shanghai, a little less the art world in Beijing, that maybe the nature of these places has also to do with the people who are there. Because if I think of the difference between the artists and organizations in Guangzhou and the artists and organizations in Shanghai, those are the ones I know the best, there's just like a whole different feeling. Now, does this come from the place, like Guangzhou is marginal, Shanghai is maybe less marginal, or commercial? Yeah, I mean maybe it's like that. And then I'm thinking about here. So I spent the 80s in San Francisco. The 80s in San Francisco was like Guangzhou. It's ruined now, it's gone. San Francisco is a horrible place, but for artists. It's a good place for money, but it's a horrible place for artists. But in the 80s in San Francisco, we were always looking to New York because that was where the art world was, but we didn't give a shit. We could do anything, we could risk, we could fail. Nobody was looking at us. It was fabulous. The art was so wonderful there because of that. And it had this kind of energy that New York never had. So, you know, I'm kind of thinking San Francisco was also marginal. It was the wrong coast. It was the wrong place. It was a small town. It wasn't LA. It wasn't New York. Anyways, it was a long thing, but I'm just kind of thinking, is it the place? Is it the people in the place? Or is it a kind of combination of both? Did either of you have any feelings about this?
I would say it's a combination of both. Especially, I mean, even though like I'm not a person from Guangdong, but I have been in Beijing, like studying Beijing for 5 years, and I was born in Hunan, which is also pretty marginalized. And now my family moved to Guangdong, and I feel like I always like I personally I'm driven by the places where which can give me a sense of liberty, I would say, and freedom. And I think indeed Guangdong has that kind of sense still now, where the like social practice scene is actively ongoing. I still like met artists from that region, and it's like this kind of regionality kind of facilitates the interpersonal relationship that artists have. So maybe that's the same case for artists in the 90s or even earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, my
Even
feeling.
if they would choose to be there. There's a reason that they went there.
Or that's the axis that they will go other than like Beijing or
Right.
Shanghai. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, my feeling is in 90s, when we talked at the beginning, that time in Guangzhou or in China. So several days ago, a young critic asked me a question. How do you, most people, how many, the most contemporary artists in 90s, what were they thinking about I say that time in China mainland, totally the population of the modern artists or modern art artists totally maybe 10 or 15. Yeah, this is totally. I mean, so in Guangzhou there are big tail elephant and plus Zhenguogu, just 5. So that time we feel so isolated. Totally no art world, nothing, and no information. Yeah, so we just stay together every day talking about. We just exchange a little bit the information from the outside. Jeff Koons do something, or something. Matthew Barney do something, or Kiefer do something. Every day we need this. If you don't do that, totally no information. So that time, so some people ask me question. You big-tailed elephant, you guys want to, how to say, come together? Or you want to get the power? I said no. No, we just.
Out of necessity.
If you stay alone there, you will have no space to show. So with 4 people, we can show on street. We're on work side on street. This is the situation. I think this is early situation. Not we like, but we have to like something like that.
Another question? Did you ask a question before? I'm going to get one from here. Sorry, we'll come back to you.
I just want to add something to this idea of pro-river delta, because for me, like as a resident growing up in the region, I think this term like exists first and foremost as a geopolitical or economic policy proposed by the nation state. It isn't something that come up from the grassroots. So I mean, for Hong Kong people, like now they're using a new term, the Greater Bay. It's extremely threatening to try to group this region into sounds neutral, like geographical term. It really isn't. Just think about it. Like Guangzhou is a city with really long history. Shenzhen is, completely came from the artificial, and Hong Kong is a colonial place. And to use this term to group it all together, I think there's a lot of organic thing happening, and the artist and the curator are feeling the energy in their life in reality. But there's also a nation state perspective that should be considered.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, Xiaofei, what you're saying, because I think that's definitely true. I mean, let's zoom this out a bit. And there is something, shall we say, not sinister, but clearly tactical or strategic with this naming of the Pearl River Delta. At the same time, I thought it was very important that you recognize what Rem Koolhaas and the influence of Rem Koolhaas at the time. He was not necessarily influenced by the political regime, yet at the same time he was definitely looking at it as an economic phenomena that was providing opportunity for architects. There were more architects working in China during the 90s and 2000s of that caliber than there were probably in other places. But he saw something changing fast, but he also saw that in Lagos, because he has this, he did a project in Lagos and he did a project in Las Vegas. And he brought those, he was kind of trying to triangulate the phenomena in that way. So I think you have sort of almost a perfect storm happening, and clearly we have a storm in Hong Kong right now. And I don't think it's unrelated to all of this. The tensions that they saw and perceived, as well as the pressures that were coming from the top for various other reasons, are now playing out in what we see in Hong Kong. Another question?
Well, it's a statement and a comment and a question, but something that someone that I know who's lived there said to me, this was in 2006, was that people from Guangdong always knew that the emperor was far away because he was in Beijing, and people that lived in the south knew that long before the PRC existed. It was just an idea that there was such a great distance. So it's something that came to mind as you were giving your presentation. But the other thing too to consider, what you're saying is, without that development, that even influenced digital cameras. There was a middle class that had the ability to have cameras, to have video in the 90s. You're talking about 95, but just artists that were working in 2005, Xiao Fei, like, she could get stuff like Hong Kong, not only stuff from Hong Kong, but she told me that she could get like videos and things from South Korea. And that was just in 10 years after 95. And in 2005, she was, so all of those things, proximity to other parts of Asia, that she had an openness to living there.
And you tell a very funny story in that film we did about Cantonese art, about the tape recorder. People thought it was Deng Lijun singing on the tape recorder. And people confused the tape recorder for Deng Lijun. Anyway, yeah, because in the South, in fact, in the South, it's you see the film. But we did a film actually early in 2006. We did a film in 2006 called Cantonese Art. From being a pop star who sang in this very high-pitched, sweet voice about love, who was from Taiwan. But because of the access that southern China had to Hong Kong and Taiwan, that music came in through that, as well as tape recorders. And then Shutan has a funny story about going north with his tape recorder, and people in the north had never seen it before, and they couldn't tell the difference between the tape recorder and whether it was really supposed to be.
就插卡录音机，还有人家要。At that time, all this machine is called.
No, it was a cassette tape recorder.
Yeah.
Cassette. This is she doesn't even know who it is.
with two speakers.
Yeah.
So that time all these things came from Hong Kong, and also 是走私的。Yeah, so that's very fashion. If some guy walk on the street to hand, I'll bring this. Oh, people say, well, that's good. And so that time, every new thing, every fashion thing is come from south, from Canton, Guangdong. So that time, Guangdong, there are some special streets, especially for selling dress or fashion dress, and this street to sell the equipment or everything like this. Many people, you can say many people just came with a bag with the three colors stripe, like the French national flag. Yeah, on street, people know. Oh, this come from Beifang, from north. They want to buy something and put it back. Yeah. So we have a special name to them, 叫导爷. Now in China, people just forget the word. 导爷.
Like someone to trade.
Yeah, there's the parallel. Remember the parallel traders in Hong Kong? Everybody got so upset about. Okay, one more question, and then that's it. No more. Oh yes, we have. Yes, Harry wanted one.
Mine's also maybe about internationalism. I was interested to note that the first big-tail elephant flyer had English text on it, and so I feel like I'm interested in. It's there's Hou Hanru is like going to Venice and internationalizing the Pearl River Delta, but it's also happening at the level of young artists, and I'm curious why. And like I also look in a different direction. Actually, I guess this the image next to it. Yeah, why was the bookshop Borges bookshop, and what was the influence there? Because that's a Latin American writer.
Question is,
Well, the question is, were you conscious of the audience, the international audience?
对，当时比如大尾像有英文名字的时候，你会不会已经知道了？是因为有人能读得懂英文，还是
no, this is that the
还
situation.
有像博尔豪斯的那个
That's a French.
是拉丁，是不是有是拉丁为主？
Latin American.
拉丁美洲的影响，你为什么会用这个词？
So that's very interesting question. Is that time in Canton, so people the thinking is different from the northern people. People think you should do something for the future. The future should towards the very wide. Yeah.
Open
So yeah, you should, of course, you should face to the Western art circle. They will come. But the strange is, in that time, we never think about the success. Because that's incredible.
It's impossible.
Of course, you just make something on street. How can you go to the Biennale or Documenta? But then something happened like that. We just I don't know what's happened. So I mean, that time. So people, this generation artists, they are more. I mean, just in Canton, people are more concentrate in the creation, not for the market, not for the success, or how to say, in the art world. That time, just that time. But later it's different, I think.
And keep it in context in some ways. It was very radical to actually have access to these kinds of audiences, or imaginations, let's call them. Because before that, there was such a limit on what Chinese could read, what Chinese could have access to, the kind of television that they could see, things like that. So, having this kind of imagination puts you in a very different position.
I have a small story.
Yes, you can. And that'll be the last. The last small story.
In 1994, sometime like that, a German expert came from the 德国之声, so German.
Deutschland.
Okay, he has some work in the Guangdong TV station. So he know. In the city, there are some local small group of artists that they are young. They want to have dinner with us, and then, so this is why the English is important. And another thing is, he say, why you guys why don't you make art following the Beijing style? I mean, talking about the East West and all criticize the communist and also. That time there are a very famous style called the
Political pop. Cynical rhetoric, or political pop or cynical realism.
There are three ways. I said, so we really don't know why we didn't follow them, but we want to do something about the reality, and so I answered him. I said, please don't mention this to me. I mean, communists, they is over in the historical, go to the trash, The future, like post-modernism, this is the future. We would like to look this kind of the future and our reality. Every day you can see the neon lights or something. Yeah, we don't want to think about this.
Waste your time with it.
And the man came back and tell the Chinese friends, say, these artists are very naive. Communists are still there. And someday I came to Jen. Jen asked me a question, how do you think about something? And I feel I'm still naive, Anyways, Cantonese artists, they are always naive. In very, how to say, the Chinese people, culture is so so when we go to Beijing, I think just we are children. The Beijing artists are
On that note, Cantonese are naive and the Northerners are sophisticated. Anyway, a wonderful talk. Thank you.